Good morning, and welcome back to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy, Seth, and Mike. Good morning.
Happy Tuesday, gentlemen.
Here we go.
It
Good
is
morning.
another week. The summer has officially started. For those of you with children, you know exactly what I mean.
Exactly. The next level of chaos has instilled.
Yeah, man. You know, like there's something about the consistency of the school year where buses come and pick up children on a everyday cadence. Summer just brings its own new possibilities of carting kids all over the place, along with the normal workload.
You have been officially designated the cruise director.
Yeah,
What are we doing? Like every morning, what are we doing today? Where are we going? How are you going to entertain me?
camps, and sports camps and days home.
When I was your age, I used to go outside and play with sticks.
Yeah.
How about you do that?
You want a bike? Go find one in the garbage.
Well, it wasn't that bad.
We'll fix it up.
It wasn't that rough. We had bikes. I was just walking the other day, and when I was a kid, or when my father was a kid, he was talking about, well, what would they do when they would find random things to go do, and they would do a lot of things on bikes. Bike was like a main mode of kid transportation, and now there's like a million different modes of transportation. We see like my kids are out on scooters, and we have bikes, and we have skateboards, and like all these things didn't exist a long time ago. Literally, all you did was if you wanted to go somewhere, you got on a bike and you went there. Like there wasn't like you couldn't choose like a scooter, like all these other movement devices. I was like, it's interesting. Maybe kids are used to getting shoveled around in cars so much now that we can have these other vehicles that are less efficient, right? A bike was efficient. You could go miles on a bike.
Yeah.
I don't think I would want to. I wouldn't want to pedal miles on a skateboard or like a scooter. Like that would be a mess.
Or the big wheels, man.
Oh, the power wheels? Oh, the big wheels, the thing in the front?
Yeah.
Yeah, those were fun.
Yeah, those were the best until you blew the tire in the back. And then they were garbage, right?
Then
Like,
they can throw them out.
Yeah. Just
That's funny.
Good times. Good times.
Good times. Yeah, summer started for us a few weeks ago. There's pool and swimming that the kids are doing now. There's a few camps, basketball camps.
Where do you go to swim? Do you have some friends that have pools, or do you go to like a quay?
No, we're teaching them swimming. So
you're going to swimming lessons.
Yeah. So
I think that's a really good skill to learn. When I remember being a kid, I have a lot of fond memories of just being able to go swimming in. I lived in Maryland at the time, so we had the Chesapeake Bay was where we had to go swimming. We hang out there, hang at friends' pools. That was just a lot of fun. I would spend hours at a pool. I love swimming. All right, no one else does. All right, great. Let's move on.
I mean, I haven't swam in so long. So
I mean, swimming's great. Kids love swimming lessons, swimming at camp. It's all good. Swimming's great.
All right, let's talk about data things, sections that we have opinions about.
I will say I am loving the new card visual and seeing what everyone's doing with it.
That is a great addition. Great addition. Miguel Myers is the one who's producing, building, creating these new layers of visuals, and you're seeing a lot of new features being added. This one does a lot of things. You can round the edges, you can change the corners, you can stylize a whole bunch of things on this card, and add images and colors, and man, it is really, really exciting to see that one. So we are actively adding that to the theme generator here shortly, so that should be out here fairly soon.
In the schema yet.
It's in the schema.
It's in the new schema.
I'm super stoked because this just, to me, is like the precursor of all the stuff they're working on, right?
Yes.
If you think about it, it's like it probably a lot of those properties or things are super easy to implement. Like, oh, you want rounded corners on the top, and yeah, I can show that and blah blah. But all it takes is somebody like Miguel to go in and be like, can't we just do this, 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 and this?
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, here, done, and all of a sudden it opens up a whole slew of possibilities for folks to customize and build their own thing within a visual that just automatically does it for them. So if this is, I'm excited because if that's the direction, there's a lot of more cool looking reports coming down the road.
The only thing I would add to this one is with with the ability to make a very flexible card, it becomes more challenging to know what you can possibly do with it. There's always this person who says, I'd like to see the art of the possible. And so there's always someone who's asking for like, what could be done with this? So you really have to, I mean, for example, in the card visual, yeah, you can do some simple things. You got to study up on it. You got to see what people are actually building with it and learn how they're doing it. So you have that knowledge of like understanding what you can possibly build. So I like the card. I think it's really cool. I'll see if I can snag the link here for the new card visual.
But we've
And
already
then
been
here's the
doing
blog
that.
post for that.
You've already been doing that. Like think about the creativity of even Miguel, right? Like he and in the blog lays out like this would be 10 different components that you would put together. Like we've been building like what is possible with the kind of rudimentary building blocks we have with visualization. I think this just simplifies it. Maybe to your point, now
I gotta know what all
elevates it to a whole nother level where
yes,
we can do a lot of different things.
Well, I have to go into the card now and like understand all the settings in the card.
Yeah.
And this is why I think the theme generator makes a lot of sense, because now you can just kind of change the settings and see the card real time updating in a theme file, and then you can kind of stylize it as you go. So I really, again, I love the card. I think it's great, really good function adding feature ability, right? And also being able to run one query all at once and return all the data in one big table, one row for each metric you need, which is great. I think that makes a lot of sense. Almost every, I would say probably about, I'm going to try and 75 to 90% of all the reports that I ever build has probably more than one card on them. I mean, it's fairly common to have a series of KPIs across the top of your report, either on the home page, the overview page, whatever you want to call it. Like there's usually more than one card I'm building, I feel like. Anyways, really like that visual. Any other things that stood out to you guys on the blog or recently around?
Actually, I don't know if you guys saw, but Alex Powers actually created a Power Query template to use in data flows to scrape the Fabric Ideas site.
I saw that one.
Yeah, and then let me see if I can find the link, but I think it was someone else who then basically is creating a fabric to create a data frame, creating like a one lake for the whole idea site. If I can find it, which I will find it.
All right, well, let Tommy dig around for the link on that one. The other things
we'll bring you along for the ride for that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Watch Tommy search the internet.
Right.
So another announcement from the blog was the Forrester announcement was augmented BI platforms Q2 2023 was out there now. So Microsoft just announced that they are again named another leader in the Forrester wave, which is again they've been kind of a leader here for quite a while, but I think it was interesting the comment or quotation they pulled out of the report themselves. Seth, do you want to read the quotation? Because I think it was kind of funny there. You picked up on it. I didn't pick up on this.
Oh, yeah. So, Forrester noted in the report, it's close to impossible to poke holes in Microsoft's overall BI strategy, which includes vision, innovation, roadmap, partner ecosystem, adoption, and pricing flexibility and transparency. That's all very true, and this is one of the reasons why they're there.
Pricing and flexibility is the issue.
Segue. last final sentence gave me the chuckle where it isn't that Microsoft is bringing wildly different capabilities to the market. It's that it has the vision and deep pockets to invest in all the capabilities to do them all quite well. It's like the deep pockets part was like
it's like a jab at Tableau.
Kind of a jab almost.
Yes, it was.
But at the same time, like it's not like Microsoft is bringing wildly different capabilities. I'm like, well, I mean, in certain areas, are there tools and things that have been out there that have been serving a lot of the purposes that they've kind of pulled together all within Fabric and their ecosystem? Yes, but just like Power BI, right? It's how you've brought these things together and how well they work together. So the preview of Fabric, super exciting. We obviously talk about it all the time. I think this just accelerates really fast the way Power BI did, right? As an ecosystem, introducing a new way in which businesses interact with data. And I think we're going to talk about that today, right? Especially with how does that landscape change in in the modification of our understanding of like workspaces.
I wonder how long Forrester's been doing augmented business intelligence platforms. I know that's not Gartner. It's always been like a BI platform, but the augmented side of that seems to be a little newer.
I don't know. I don't follow Forrester very much, other than the fact that they every so often pop out a little review. I do think it's very interesting. So if you go to the article, which I'll put out here as well, this is Forrester's report. Actually on Forrester, trying to spell that right. Forrester's report.
Yeah.
There's actually a really interesting graphic that's halfway down. It talks through like here's the weighted averaging. It talks about Amazon, Domo, Google, IBM, Microsoft, MicroStrategy, Oracle, and kind of points out all of them and the strengths of them. And they very much like the strategy and the market presence of Microsoft. But they basically gave them 100% scores all the way through the group there. But it's also interesting to see where does the other tools integrate with different services. Their current offering is where the price the scores really start to differ.
I don't think I've ever seen the visual is interesting along with the table, but like fives across the board. Like they basically pegged the chart.
Oh yeah, especially for that first graphic.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Their strategy, vision, and roadmap.
But if you think about like and that's probably why. I mean, to me, the messaging was a little confusing around like what are we getting, what's coming up, and what's longer term vision with Fabric and everything within it. But it like this is more focused, I think, towards the strategy and AI innovation. Like how are we going to accelerate the traditional business intelligence, or even the second wave that we've been kind of riding with, pulling in large data sources, but still having to plug into multiple different services to do that. So leveraging all this together, I think, is an interesting move to me, especially around one lake, consolidating data. Like in my basic understanding of things, I would just assume that makes it a whole lot easier to start to leverage the advanced capabilities that we'll start to have in co-pilots and AI on that ecosystem.
So it's interesting you mentioned Copilot, because I was looking at the Microsoft blog, and I actually, on the main article that's on the main page, May 23rd, they still have the introducing Microsoft Fabric and Copilot in Microsoft Power BI's blog. And when I go into that blog, there's like literally a one paragraph around Copilot, and everything else is about Fabric. I'm like, I feel like the title was a little bit misleading. You're focusing on Copilot, and you only have like one paragraph on what Copilot's going to do. So like, yeah, it's a little bit like, I feel like you're trying to emphasize the AI side of things a bit much.
It's almost like naming a podcast show RIP Workspaces.
Yeah,
RIP Workspaces, Microsoft WTF.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Workspaces, the fabric, right?
Exactly.
The fabric.
Workspaces in the fabric.
Yeah, it's going to change things
in the fabric.
So I think this is a good transition into our main topic for today. So let's jump in. So our topic for today is kind of, rest in peace, Power BI Workspaces. So this will be an interesting topic to kind of see where people land on this one. I have some opinions around this one, and we'll see what kind of happens here. I think the addition of Microsoft Fabric is going to change a lot of patterns for organizations on how they want to think about their data and how they're going to be able to engineer information. So maybe we should start slightly at the beginning here. Let's talk about Workspaces and what change are Workspaces going through now with the addition of Fabric. What have we seen feature-wise come out here recently? Todd, you want to just give me a quick overview of why does a workspace exist?
The biggest things with Workspaces since the beginning was always for OneDrive teams and groups to be created. Oh no, never mind. That was
you're going way back.
Yeah. So really, Workspaces have always been part of Power BI, honestly, since they launched it. And really, it was a way to simply from a collaboration point of view, share, manage, and organize content. This was before Power BI apps. There was a thing called content packs back in the day too. But it's really meant for if I'm a particular user, I can publish to a workspace, like say a sales workspace. I have that ability. And then I can share within that workspace individual items. They've always had an idea of roles. And I think It was back in the day, it was literally just admin and member. But it's really just the way to organize content. That way, in a larger organization, people who don't need to publish or manage or edit or delete content in a workspace that they are not really responsible for, they don't want to have to worry. Now, workspaces really have grown, obviously evolved to being tied to Power BI apps. We will not talk about content packs at all, but deployment pipelines really being part of the life cycle of publishing, deploying content, and then also sharing and letting others have access to that content. There's still the idea of administrators and contributors to create, publish, and manage the content, but now there's the other side of being able to access and see what content's available in a workspace.
So, go ahead, Seth. You ready to say something?
No, you mixed a lot of things in there, and I'm wondering, did you like with Workspaces? Did you ever share workspace access with just a viewer, somebody who's in?
Never.
Okay.
Never.
So
Unless they're
hold on.
I like
That's
this.
the distinction I want to make, because you threw in share into this ecosystem, and
this is where I was going to go.
Workspaces are for the doers. They're the builders. You may be in a team where you're collaborating with these objects, but ultimately workspace access on most every level is specifically for the teams of builders, whether that's in the business or in enterprise or wherever. It's where you're creating these logical places that may be specific to a business area, might be a test and a prod, etc.
Right.
But you have access to the workspaces where you're a part of managing or should have visibility into the products themselves to fix them. They're not the area where we bring in every consumer of a report. That's why we have sharing mechanisms directly from a report or with apps. And now that those are extended, they're even better with the multiple different audiences. But it's still the developer, right? Like this is the doers of building things. Like that's who belongs in the workspace and the permissions that go along with them in the Microsoft ecosystem for, I think we were talking specifically Power BI, right?
Yes.
Yes.
So here's where I want to start talking about, like, man, there's so many things that go along with this, I feel like. But Tommy, you brought up this whole sharing portion. I think before apps, PowerBI.com was a good method to share content through. I think that was kind of like the original thought here. But things got more complicated when we started talking about, okay, how do we start leveraging corporate or certified data sets and reports in combination with like non-certified things? And again, I'm thinking through that Matthew Roach's pyramid again, right? We have at the top, we have enterprise data warehousing or enterprise data sets. And then we have down at the very bottom, we have like personal or team level reporting, right? So on one end of the spectrum, we have a very controlled experience where no one should be touching things in different environments. Like it's literally a view only kind of ecosystem. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have this, you have full control, build whatever you want. It's on you. And so as I look across workspaces, I think about workspaces and a pattern that kind of emerged from Microsoft and even on the adoption roadmap was this pattern of have a single workspace or a deployment pipeline for just the data sets and make a separate deployment pipeline, a separate group of workspaces for the reports or the thin reports. So now you have a data set that can be migrated between dev, test, and production. And then you have a thin report that can be going from dev, test, and production. I think this makes a lot of sense when we're talking about enterprise BI, the top of that pyramid, very governed, managed, and secured. I'm not sure I always agree with this at the lower end of the spectrum. And so this is where I'm kind of not struggling, but I'm kind of continually teasing out workspaces, to me, feel more like a pairing with the app. So when I share or distribute content, I'm more likely to not give access to Power BI workspaces and instead give more access to the app level stuff. So I will publish an app off of the test workspace and have people go test or quality check your data there. And then on the production environment, again, we don't share the actual reports directly. You actually keep that workspace locked down to maybe one or two people, the release manager, right? That persona, the person who's like moving content through these different, pipelines.
Yep.
And the app is the only way that you're sharing information. And I think to your point, Seth, I think to me, the workspaces should be really focused on the people doing the work, executing the movement of content and making sure that content is correct and out the door.
Yeah. And the thing I like about the way they implemented apps, even in the fact when it was one workspace, one app, which was less useful.
Yes.
But now I like with multiple audiences and different artifacts from a workspace, I think it meets all my needs. But one of the things I like is I can deploy a change to that workspace and it doesn't automatically get rolled into the app, right? I have to go update the app before the changes that I've deployed into the service from the report perspective are actually pushed into the end user. And that almost acts like a UAT, right? Push, do your final checks and validation right before you're going to light it up for them.
So here's where I want to start kind of poking on things a little bit more around this. So, okay, we have this kind of general concept of around here's an enterprise data set.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you feel this fits with like that team or that personal level workspace? So here comes part of my I understand that more of that stuff at the lower end of the ungoverned space of content, it's just going to kind of happen. So in your organizations or things that you've worked with clients, how do you feel it's better to produce, or where does the workspace fit in those more personalized and team level reporting? What does that look like to you? And does that team level reporting or workspace, does that hang off of data sets that have been built and developed by enterprise?
In current state Power BI?
In current state Power BI. Where do you feel like that fits? Or do you think or maybe it doesn't fit? I don't know. Did I catch you off guard?
Oh, you're asking me specifically, not us, where I'm just like waiting for Tommy to chat.
I'm going to let you go on this because actually,
Are you not with us yet? Okay. So,
I am with you.
So the use cases, I think there's many different use cases, and one that you outlined is not one that I typically am. I personally am implementing because my team is very enterprise focused, right?
Yeah. So you're building everything at the top, pretty much.
Correct.
It all comes through one team, and it's going to start. But I feel like that's how it starts. I feel like it starts with that. Right? You have a single handful of data sets. You have a handful of reports that start enterprise, and then you're going to have this request. Well, the request will come, I think. Right? I think there's another wave of requests that are going to come. Hey, how can I get access to that data? How can I build off of that data set? Or can I take a copy of that report and build my own thing? Are you going to say no to all that?
This is a conversation we've had way too many times, from the self-service to how much access. And it's tough, especially because there's no real automated way, especially for enterprise organizations, to manage this. If you're a small business or a smaller company, maybe 30, 40 workspaces, yeah, it's probably easy to have maybe like a request system. But if you're a larger organization, it's really hard to say, okay, who can administer a workspace?
Yes.
Who's responsible for giving those people access?
I like this point.
And then because you think about also the levels of the champions, where you have obviously the federated BI team, but you're going to have people who are self-service. Or do they get to publish to those same workspaces?
I like this question a lot. So,
okay,
go ahead.
Point of clarification. We're talking about non-Fabric workspaces right now. Just Power BI, or all of a sudden are we mixing in capabilities that Fabric allows us to do?
Oh, okay. So right now, up until this point,
I really want to make a distinction.
Yeah.
We haven't yet for any listener. Is like, what are the differences of evolution of you're just in Power BI, how we operate with workspaces? What are the other things that are now implemented in Fabric, which opens up a whole slew of conversation, which I'm fine digging into, but I'm having a hard time tracking whether or not we're jumping right into that.
Makes total sense.
Or if we're still in Power BI realm without Fabric.
No. Up until this point, I've been thinking solely around this. I haven't even touched what Fabric changes to this ecosystem. I'm just thinking about, ignoring all of the things that come with Fabric, a lake house, data engineering, data science, notebooks, pipeline, like all this other stuff just gets added into this whole ecosystem.
Okay.
And so
we're just talking about the complications already of workspaces within Power BI.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about, I think where I see things going, I think a lot of organizations don't have a fundamental grasp of what is a workspace admin, what is a workspace member, contributor, and viewer. And I would argue, the admin of a workspace is the person who would request it for their team or their individual group. And they, by requesting a workspace, are default the admin and the owner. They need to go through additional training. They need to understand what it means to make an app. They need to understand deploying things. They need to own that content. So when we talk about self-service BI, and this is where I think I'm starting to go with some of these thoughts or this theory here, right? So Seth, you're in a space where it's a totally enterprise, right? You own it. Your team has admin privileges and all these things, and no one else has basically contributor or viewer access for any of your environments because you are owning that content. At some point, there will be other teams that need to own a workspace, and they will have to we got to go when there's a problem with that workspace, when the data comes out incorrectly, who do we go to say, hey, you're responsible for the stuff coming out of this workspace. What does that look like? And so that's where I think like the admin and the member portions of this make more sense. And I would say 90% of all your people should always be just a contributor. And I don't ever see a use case really for the viewer role anymore now that I want to use apps to publish content. So that's kind of where I was going with some of that talk around, who can administer the workspace? What is the responsibility? And I feel like the workspace for me has become more of a delegation of responsibility, right? So if I have a data set that's sitting in a pipeline, that data set is owned by someone. The owner of that data set, or the person that I go contact when there's a problem with that one, is the admin or potentially a member of that workspace. That's where the group owns that stuff. If I then give access to that data set to another business team, let's say I'm in sales, right? And I have the sales data set that's made at the corporate level, and I start giving the sales team their own workspace, and they can then connect to my data set that's corporate. I think that's something that Microsoft wants you to do. They want you to design these, team-based workspaces of people building content on top of models that are enterprise grade. And to me, this is where I think the challenge comes is we now have to, as an admin or an owner of the Power BI workspace, we now need to have this clear handoff, this moment in time that says, hey, we don't own your content. You are the owner of this workspace, and here's the expectations that goes along with owning this workspace. Because I feel like too often, organizations just kind of give out workspaces, and there's no rhyme or reason. There's no thought to it. There's no commitment of ownership to these things. And so then when data goes wrong or data is incorrect, there's no support mechanism to support these things longer term.
I like the point, because the way I would look at that is you may not necessarily need to tell people that they can't build a workspace. However,
yes,
if it seems prudent to have a process by which people would know how to move their workspace into a managed workspace by admins, or if you're starting to leverage data sets or need access to certain things, you automatically get put in a bucket where you're part of a capacity, right? How do I get my workspace into a capacity? Now you're managed. Who's the owner of that? Does an admin automatically need to get added to the workspace, or are we just you managing your own refreshes, et cetera? So I think I agree. It's a really good idea to either control those mechanisms or have a process, that defines them for people building things.
Yes.
And in general, before extending into Fabric, you should get much more serious around the administration of what's going on in the workspaces as far as roles are concerned.
Okay, I really like. Yeah, I like that a lot. Yeah, because I think if you have loose management of your control of administration and delegation of workspaces to other teams, adding Fabric is just going to add more fuel to that fire. And without that proper, at least a thought process around how we're going to govern these things and what does that mean. Because now we've added another whole layer of just complication.
But here's the thing, though, and this all probably goes into the new domains feature too. The admin, it's really hard just to have one admin. Obviously, Power BI, and more or less an admin per workspace. It's it's something that needs automation, and I think this is something that we haven't talked about as much. But the need for this is really when you need IT or those who are in charge of Active Directory to be involved, because there's no way this can be managed from an individual scale.
What do you mean by that? So you said it's really hard to make an admin for a workspace. I'm not sure I understand your
It's really
statement
hard.
there.
It's not necessarily hard to make an admin for a workspace, but it is hard to specify particularly one administrator for a workspace
Why?
having all the roles.
Why?
Because, well, think about this. They're going to be, what are they responsible for if they're an administrator for a workspace?
Okay, that question is what an organization has to decide on. What does that mean, right? I would argue an admin is responsible for controlling who has access to that workspace, how content is being shared, how data sets are being built, and the quality of those data sets, and the impact. If that admin is on a premium workspace, that admin is also responsible for, is your data set eating up all of our premium capacity? And we will have monitoring that will let us know when that workspace becomes abusive and someone loads a mega big data set or a mega bad query. So the admin is the person we go to start that conversation to figure out, hey, there's 3 data sets in this workspace that are causing us all kinds of headache, and it's causing our other queries to time out because your query or your data set is so bad, it's eating up all our premium capacity. So there has to be 1 or 2 people at the top of that workspace that says, you are the contact person. But I think this is something that we're not communicating to owners or admins of workspaces. And when I show up to companies, it's tons of admins. There's like 6 admins, 7 admins. Like everyone's an admin and no one's a member or a contributor. Well, who do I talk to?
Can I make a recommendation?
Okay.
Let's parking lot this and do a show on roles of individuals and workspaces.
Yeah, I agree with that one.
Separate thing than we want to dive into today.
So
we're high level.
And I get you. I'm with you on that one. So taking that aside, I think there's things to tease out here. The reason I wanted to bring this whole data set and workspace and pipelines and all this kind of stuff is now you add in the context of Fabric. And so now I feel like there's another whole layer of complication that's occurring here where we're saying, okay, in previous designs, I'd have a pipeline for the data set. I'd have a pipeline for the reports. Do I now need a pipeline for the data lake and the data engineering that's occurring behind all of this? So instead of talking about 6 workspaces, we're now talking about 9 of them. Holy smokes!
No. Like okay. So it's a prospective use case, right?
Okay.
I think the solid argument you made was start from a solid stance of understanding roles, governance, understanding of what workspaces are and do in your environment before you open that Fabric trigger.
Yes, I agree with that.
100%. And I think it deserves more like discussion, because the nuance of roles and responsibilities, I think it changes within the context of like what your capabilities of workspaces are. Driving it in a little higher level. Like we've defined workspaces within the Power BI ecosystem. When you turn on the Fabric, when you put the Fabric on, it feels good. What are some of the new capabilities or things that are ancillary around workspaces that are now introduced into that ecosystem that people need to be aware of?
So I think the first one, Tommy, and this may not be a feature of, this is domains. So I don't know if this is a Fabric only feature. It feels like this is a Power BI feature that was added at the same time as Fabric. So it feels like a Fabric feature, but I don't think this is only linked to Fabric.
Really?
I think so. I think you can use domains. I think you can use a domain. It's a domain. So let's define a domain. There's a new feature in the admin portal that even when you go to settings on a workspace, you can now select a workspace and then you can pick from a list of domains. So if you think of domain being a collection of workspaces that all relate to the same team or subject matter within your organization. I may have a sales team and there may be different components of that sales team, and we may have 5 workspaces of team members that are going to build things in Power BI. And so I see, and this is how I interpret it, domains are a collection of workspaces that all pertain to sales. That's how I would see that.
Correct.
And
It
so
would
then
allow you to easily group
a whole bunch
your particular use case, right?
Yes.
If you had multiple different workspaces, but they're
Yes.
all controlled by sales, this would allow you to control that particular area. I fact check on the. I thought domains were Fabric only.
I think it is because it is the administrator role, but everything, at least from the documentation, says is called Fabric domains, not necessarily just single domains. And
this is where it gets
But I
confusing to
don't-
me, because this is
Yeah.
because like it doesn't. If you go to the admin page, it mentions nothing about Fabric, and you can create a domain and you can add non-Fabric workspaces into a domain.
Can you
So I
really?
think it's just a logical grouper,
Okay.
but they're just calling it Fabric because now Power BI is Fabric, or the website of Power BI is now Fabric. I don't know where the lines draw anymore at this point. Like, it's going to be kind of a mess.
Either way, there's this concept called domains, and you can
Correct.
associate workspaces to them.
Yes.
Like the interesting hierarchy to me here is this is a logical grouping, and you also have kind of a logical grouping of workspaces. But if you think about it, you could associate multiple different capacities to different workspaces, right? So depending
Yes.
on what the needs are
Yes.
or whatever, how those get billed or charged, or whatever you're
Yeah,
utilizing,
totally.
those all still fall under the domain of sales. So if sales needs multiple capacities, or they need to do certain things because whatever,
But
pick your business unit, right? Like,
But this makes sense though, because if you want to throw like a premium capacity on,
Right.
like if sales has bought their own premium SKU and they're going to pay for it, all the workspaces you would want to manage all the workspaces that just live in that premium capacity as a collective group. The settings would need to be all the same. It could be a mess if you had 5 workspaces all attached to the same P1 capacity, and you have to go through and change. Okay, well, we're going to have AI off. We're going to have data flows on. We're going to have this. Like, there's all these settings that would make sense, and I think that logically makes sense. The idea is the domain is you can apply group settings or settings to the entire library of workspaces that make up that domain.
And that's the weird part here, because it really is just, in a sense, it's really less about the organization where you think maybe it's like a hierarchy of folders. It kind of is that,
Yeah.
but from a UI, from a collaborator point of view, it really has not a lot to do with that. It's really from a high level security point of view, at least from the data hub, right? Where I can't see necessarily the domain of the workspace. Obviously, first even if I have access to a domain, I still need access to the workspace.
well, and
just
that's but I think that's part of the role conversation too, right? Like, how do you segment out? There are different levels of permissioning within domains as well, right? And there are different criteria. So, well, once again, like, who are the people? What are the roles and responsibilities, et cetera? I think for the context of this conversation, it's a bucket. We can add a bunch of workspaces onto it, and that allows us to extend the features further. Other things that are different with Fabric workspaces than Power BI, right? Is you have access to all of these other features within the context of a workspace, right? Which I think is the big change for report authors and users, is that we're now opening up like all of the ETL and data and sources of information to people in that developer workspace. And that's where I think a lot of the, like, oh my goodness kind of reactions come, because it's you're introducing the potential of more individuals to be added to a workspace instead of just the report group.
And domains are also interesting because a domain now also has an admin and a contributor role. So we've added another layer to, like, what does
Correct.
that mean? How does that fit with everything else? I just, my general feel here is, and the reason why I was actually pushing for a lot of the RIP workspaces, I feel like I'm saying RIP workspaces is, we are now going to be inundated with workspaces. Like, it's going to be workspaces for everything. There's going to be, like, yeah, we had challenges before, But now this added another whole layer. And this is why I think the domains thing kind of appeared, the feature applied, because now we have a ton of permutations of what we can build with domains. And so now adding, we weren't able to get folders before, but now we have this domains folder capability potentially, right?
Yeah, which is also like why I want to walk away from getting stuck into roles specifically, just
Sure.
because those are the people, right? Like, and focus more on the big shift between what workspaces mean, right? And
Yes.
workspaces in Power BI are, like Tommy said earlier, they're the contributors, the administrators, the members of reports, right? The final product that's going out to the business. Where Fabric,
Oh, I see where you're going with this. I like this.
Where Fabric challenges that is what is the problem or challenge with Power BI on its own in Workspaces and contributors. It's the final product. It's a data mart, or it's a model that somebody else can connect to and leverage and use. But we know that if I'm sales, and just because I give them access to a fully curated model, they're going to have a side thing that they need to connect to that. They're
Yes.
not going to have, like, there's always another bit that some other part of the business requires on the data set.
Correct.
So where I think this evolution of Power BI being this ecosystem, and now Fabric opening up all the layers of data to the same people, I think challenges or introduces a completely different view that businesses need to like digest and figure out how they reorganize, or if they do, if they do, of who gets access to the workspace and how do we analyze and verify data. Because ultimately Fabric is, from my perception of the marketing and everything, bringing everything to a unified place. And that truly is the case. If I think about, well, what is the challenge of Power BI data sets and Workspace and Contributor right now, is it's the final product always. But if I now open up the layers of like, okay, here's where I have the data. You don't need to care how I did it, but if you want to walk through how I did it, this is like, now I have this interface that would allow me to walk somebody to the objects that if they need to go access before a data model, but it's still part of a certified layer, like now I have that easily available to me in the OneLake, and I can share that with somebody. If somebody needs to vet business logic in ETL, we can walk through that. Like, you're all within this interface where now it's just, hey, rather than focusing so much on a final product, when data people can work off that, but many times require the other thing, or I need to hook into the like a backend system. Those are challenges that we've talked about and faced in like, how do we curate something that's like ready for the business, or certified to a certain level, and how do I start leveraging that? How do they see like the enterprise cleansing of a whole bunch of data and getting to a golden record? Those were all separations of IT and business. And where this gets interesting to me in this workspace level is, are we flattening that out, and actually, like, can we walk through use cases where this now opens up a whole new realm where I can potentially bring people I would have granted access to these data sets to give them access to more data via OneLake, et cetera.
Man, I wrote down a ton of questions, or I wrote down a ton of comments. Go ahead, Tommy. You go first.
No, and I think the biggest thing with the domains is again, I at least from what I'm seeing, is the focus from the accessibility or the discoverability, not so much the security that you would do with workspace admins and the contributor roles, because there's no really role in domains except the administrator who can assign a workspace to a domain. So to me, it's really what they're trying to do with the domains, it has nothing to do with, from the collaboration point of view. I don't think anything changes, but because if you go to the one like Data Hub, previously the Data Hub, in the Power BI service, create a domain. That's where you're going to be able to see not just your data sets, but you'll be able to see anything, any content within that domain. So rather than a user trying to, hey, let me see this workspace or this workspace, it's just the marketing domain.
Wait a minute. So you're saying, let me just hear what I heard you say. Are you saying that if I'm a contributor to a domain and there's another workspace I don't have access to, do I by default get to see the data created in that workspace?
If you're
did I hear you wrong? Or is that what you said or no?
So with the domains,
or is it like cascading requirements? Like you'd have to be a contributor to the domain to see everything in the domain, and a contributor on the workspace to see the content created in that domain.
Well, you still have to assign workspaces to that domain. That's actually a really good question, Mike.
Just the way you were describing it to me made sense. I mean, it makes sense. Maybe that makes sense, right? There's a cascading effect of permissions that would need to occur between a domain and multiple workspaces. I'm not sure yet. Sorry, I didn't mean to derail your thought, Tommy.
No, that's a great question. So find items by the workspace.
You don't have to figure it out right now.
No, I don't think. Yeah, regardless, it's for again, I think it's like more of a UI thing, because I don't think there's anything in the admin portal, or for like, all since you create a domain, then now everyone has access. But again, I haven't tested it out.
Yeah, I'll have to build something like that where I have 3 workspaces in a domain, and then what happens if I give contributor access to the domain level? What can you see? But to your point, though, Tommy, I think what you were describing there was making a lot of sense to me. And Seth, I think I want to pick on your points here a lot as well, right? The Fabric ecosystem is now bringing 2 new personas into the Power BI ecosystem we have not had before. Typically, we've had the model builder and the report builder. There's been 2 main things that we control at the Power BI.com level. Now, what we've basically bolted on here is Azure Data Factory, Synapse, and SQL Server. They've all been brought directly into the ecosystem of now Power BI. And now we really do have what I would call a true data engineering role that can live inside the Power BI ecosystem. And so the new workspaces, this Lakehouse item, and I was thinking this myself, right? Before we had model level access permissions and report level access permissions, and potentially we would manage those with workspaces. But now what you're describing, Seth, to me sounds like there's another whole layer of access here. We can now provide access to individuals all the way down to the table level. And so when we're talking about what we can do in data flows, what we can now do with notebooks, we can access those tables, provide a link or a shortcut to the source of data, and then build downstream engineering. So to your point, Seth, right? You said, hey, look, the sales team or whatever that team is working on their data set, you can give them a data model, but they're always going to want to add some of their own data, right? Some of that stuff is going to be certified. Some of it's not going to be certified. So now we can certify individual tables and say, hey, marketing team, here's a model that's certified off these certified tables. Here we go. Although if you need additional access, Mr. Power BI champion, here you go. Here's the table that we built the model from. You can go access the raw table and add or append any data you want. And again, I would kind of argue back is this is another use case where you need to think about what does the administration of that table look like and how does that play out inside your ecosystem? Are you going to let people build their own engineering after the certified table? And then what happens to those data sets and reports downstream of that? Does that mean those things do not become certified and that's not enterprise grade, or is it just for that team? So you now have the ability of having more of that access to raw information. And what I see Power BI doing is we're marching the business user further and further and further up the stream, closer to where the source of data lives, which I think is good, but I also think it's without thought on how you're going to govern it or think about who is responsible. The data stewardship conversation becomes much more important now.
Yeah, but that's where I need to get stuck into, if we allow them access to some some of the certified tables, right?
Correct.
Like say rather than a certified data set, and that's all you can interact with. Now it's hey, all the bases for our certified data sets come from these tables. You can have access to them and bolt on whatever you need to. The value of Direct Lake hypothetically would be, well, now I don't need to worry about everybody importing the same thing over and over.
Exactly.
It still comes from
Here's
the
a
same
shortcut.
location.
Yep.
And if they add additional artifacts into their report, that would be interesting to me to see, like, can an admin see that? Like, if we're ripping through and we're making sure that our business is operating at peak efficiency, capacity is not being like absolutely killed or used, or potentially is sales introducing something that should be in my certified data set, and now I have a task for the engineering group to go make sure that it is, and then we alter that report right away.
Yeah.
Like, those are the pieces of how and where things are, whether that's going to be blocked by purview or whether or not we can see that lineage, I think would be one of the strongest things within this ecosystem to see for sure. But either way, I think it challenges, not challenges, but opens the door for possibilities of solving a lot of the problems that we would have that related to, like, you can only access this thing in the reporting layer instead of, backwards one step where you would want to actually, or maybe you only need a subset of the information, but it's still based on, our something that has gone through a lot of rigor to cleanse and clean the data to the point that makes sense for a larger swath of the business.
Yes.
And I think the other thing, which we'll have to flesh out, I think, as a side, probably in that roles conversation, is with these certified data sets, right? Like, should we be utilizing like the same, admin group, like group names that of Workspaces when we permission things, right? And I wonder how far we could extend that back and forth, because everything we've talked about is administrating via groups or group name in Power BI, because you don't want to singularly manage users in that platform.
Correct.
And that make that reason times 100 now in Fabric, because it should be owned completely by Azure AD, if at all possible, because that's how the entire ecosystem of security is going to be based. And that shouldn't be like when I say shouldn't, it would be a nightmare if you started adding single users everywhere. To try to unwind or manage that.
But it's already happening. I mean, that's the problem. I think it's already out there. People are adding individual users and they're not using things like that for best practice. And this is why I think, not to go back to it again, but like going back to the idea of a workspace and the admin, an admin can be individually added to a workspace, but I think that admin would then need to be responsible. So with the responsibility of that admin portion, that admin shows up. Oh, by the way, now you're also admin of the members security group. You're also admin of the contributor security group. You're also admin of the viewer group for that workspace. So potentially that admin now has the ability to add or remove individuals from the security groups that are now applied to that workspace. So maybe that's a process that you set up in place there that enables that admin person to be able to manage and push in or out those people, which that also, by using those security groups, you now immediately provide access to any kind of IT support that you may need to adjust or modify or, adjust those workspaces or those user groups. So now you add more capability to your support team. Oh, so many thoughts here. I can't believe we've talked about this for 50 minutes already. I've gone super fast.
That's why I wanted to table roles, because, man, that's going to be. I think this is just the first of many conversations. But what I think the value of even the name, right, of our view of Workspaces is when you log into Fabric or you open that Fabric ecosystem, you need to get rid of what Workspaces were in your head, because the potentials grow exponentially depending on how you utilize them. And what's really intriguing and fun for me to think about, and hopefully I'll have some harder, conversation points in the future, is this opens the door to end-to-end solutions within business units.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. And really, it I think could potentially even challenge how organizations are structured, because there could be a lot more of, engineers having access to multiple different workspaces that work and coincide with these people.
Yes.
But at the same time, it's not just locked into a Power BI file all the time or Power Query. Like now hey, you need us to hop in and help you guys out. Let's do it in your workspace. You own it, right? But we'll build this automation and this ecosystem that everybody is just leveraging and using. And, if it becomes big enough, maybe they have to fill that own role for themselves, right? And they have their own, person that manages all of their ETL. But across the board, maybe it removes the barrier, I think, between IT and business, and really just like leans into creating valuable data sets that can be leveraged by business users. And if it means pulling them back one more layer where they have access to, data in one lake and they just see it as a table, that's a win.
I feel like what you just said there it's sounding to me like there's a replacement of the SQL Server being removed. We're adding to the ecosystem the concept of a one lake. And I feel like what's happening physically, like in the organization of companies, is we're now encouraging the business to hire a more robust data engineer in their team. Because if a business unit has the need and can support the salary of that data engineer, you're right, Seth. You can build a full solution in that business unit, and they can maintain the whole thing. Right?
Well, you must be on a mission to replace SQL, but I don't think we're replacing.
I'm not trying to replace it.
I don't think we're replacing that. To me, it's not. This opens the door of it's not how, like, what tools or how we create data sets. I think it's making these objects of value, meaning these data sets that are curated, available to a wider audience, and that is the value, right?
And again, to be
how
clear,
we come about like creating those for the organization.
To be clear, I'm not trying to talk about killing the language of SQL, right? I love it. I think it works really well. I just think that underlying technology that's executing the SQL is substantially changing.
Of course it is.
And the idea here is like we're moving away from the concept of like I need a SQL server to do my work, and that was a very much dedicated IT role that was there. So the server we're less of emphasis on that, and we're more emphasis on lake and connecting to things inside the lake elements.
And it's even less about the services and the tools that you're using to modify data. It's about data. And I think that's what's really intriguing to me about this conversation of workspaces and opening up doors to that is, as we continue to talk about this, those use cases all revolve around, I think, more options for the business to leverage the outputs the way they need to in these ecosystems. And it becomes, to your point, less about how we store it, what tools we're using, because those decision points underneath are designed to scale and they don't need to care about them.
Yes, I agree. Oh man, this is good. We are in a very interesting time right now, and things have and I think this is, Alex Powers was on the last, episode, and he was kind of saying, I feel like there's been so much, everyone's trying to struggle to figure out where the balance of this new world lives. How does this new thing get governed or administered? Good thing it's in preview for now. It's not officially released yet, but we have time to figure out what does this mean for organizations and how this will structure things. All right, so what I did is we'll transition over to what does Bing Chat say. So I asked a very simple question over to Bing Chat, and I said, should I use Power BI Workspaces to manage content in Power BI? I think ChatGPT is a consultant. The first thing it starts with, it goes, it depends. So Bing, you need to put $1 in the kitty because you can't start anything with it depends. But it says it depends on your needs and preferences, but Power BI Workspaces can have some advantages. According to the search results, workspaces are used to collaborate with colleagues, create a collection of dashboards, reports, and data sets. You can also use workspaces to create and distribute apps to a broader audience. Some of the benefits of the workspace are granular workspace controls. You have a contact list of people who have notifications about activities and issues. I thought that was a good point. You can configure a Workspace OneDrive to use Microsoft 365 Group. Interesting. I would not have kind of picked on that one, but apparently Bing thinks it's a good feature. And you can share data sets between workspaces. We talked about that one. And you can create, they called it template apps that you can distribute to customers outside your organization, which is true. You could make a template app and publish it on the app source location. It was interesting. So very good answer, I thought. Pretty on point there, Microsoft.
On point.
On point.
I'll give that a 6.
I'd get
5.
Out of what, 30, Tommy? What,
7.
Out of 7. What would you give it, Seth? Any rankings there?
Oh yeah, solid 7.3 out of 10.
Beautiful.
I'll give it a probably like a 725 out of 1,000.
Okay,
it's good enough for me. Anyways, with that, we appreciate your listenership. Everyone, thank you so much for hanging on while we blister about user roles in workspaces. To be perfectly clear, you listened to this entire episode. I don't think workspaces are dead. They're not gone. I do think the controls and how we think about them needs to change. So I do think there's an area of new administration.
How you think about workspaces in current day?
Yes,
should go by the way
1,000%
once you enable Fabric.
I agree. I think there's going to be a shift in mindset on how you leverage and use workspaces moving forward, and you'll probably need to adapt. I would also argue if you are an admin of anything workspace related, start thinking about these questions. How do you want workspaces to be used and leveraged inside the context of your organization? Because these things I think should be at least defined up front, and your team needs to be educated on what best practices and patterns that you feel like your organization needs to use. Because if you don't do that, you're going to have all these workspaces with a whole bunch of admins, and now you have a really hard time with data stewardship. So I think there's another layer of data stewardship that's going to be coming along with this as well.
Kick the tires now in the preview. Figure it out.
Yep. Test it out now. All right. With that, we only request that if you love this podcast, please share it with somebody else. Let someone else you found no value from this, and you should never listen to it. And it's not fun, and we don't make jokes. So, Tommy, where else can you find the podcast?
Well, you can find the podcast anywhere podcasts are available. Apple, Spotify. Make sure to subscribe. Go to Power BI tips, powerbi.tips/podcast, and you can submit a mailbag. What do you want us to talk about? Make sure to join us live every Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30 a.m. Central.
Awesome. Thank you all so much, and we'll see you next time.